Hi, biology friends. Welcome to the second lecture in this unit of energy and cycles. The first one talked about levels of organization with respect to plants. This lecture, I'd like to focus in a little more detail about the levels of organism down to just the organelles of the cells themselves. So to do that, what I'd like you to do is actually find your packet from before so that you can refer back to it while we're taking notes for this one. Do you have yours? I have mine. Make sure you have it ready. All right, here we go. With your levels of organization, the page that I want you to start with is the one that went from organisms down to organs. With that, there is a diagram that is on this page that shows you the two systems, which is the shoot system and the root system, and then breaking it down further, the root system is composed of roots, and then the shoot system is composed of organs that would include the stems, the buds, the leaves, the flowers, and even the fruits in some cases. So what I'd like to look at for us, here's that very same diagram now in your packet number 2, showing the root and the shoot systems. And what I'd like you to do is with one color, I would like you to say, okay, here are my plant systems, and that's going to be the shoot system and the root system. And then my organs of each of those systems are going to be, well, my root system are comprised of roots. And then up in the plant itself, the shoot system, things that we are going to be concerned with would be like the stem as an organ, the leaf as an organ, and then, although we won't talk about them, flowers are also considered organs of the shoot system. When we talk about plants, even let me put that little purple box around organs so that my key is the same. When we talk about plants, there are going to be two major processes that we are going to be looking at in the plant. First of which is going to be photosynthesis. And I know you've been exposed to photosynthesis in the past, but we're actually going to get down into the plant cells themselves and looking at the organelles called the chloroplast and the mitochondrion, showing how, in the case of photosynthesis, the chloroplast is going to be involved, and then cellular respiration being the second major process when it comes to energy, is going to be, well, then how does the mitochondrion become involved? So we're going to be looking very small inside the plant cells themselves. If we start with the root system, and specifically the roots themselves, there are two major types of roots that are possible within our plant kingdom. Specifically, we're looking at vascular plants. One is called the taproot, which is a root that goes straight down. And when I am weeding in my backyard, a type of plant that definitely is a taproot would be those thistle weeds. Sometimes my thistle weeds can be as tall as my shrubs. Sometimes dandelions will have a taproot system. And then on the good side of life, we've got trees will have a taproot. The other type of root organization is going to be something called fibrous roots. And the fibrous roots are going to be lots of small little roots that branch out. And where I've seen these is definitely with grasses. I pull out a chunk of grass that tries to grow into my landscaping, and then as I pull on it, I can see roots traveling kind of far away from those because they want to go and they sprout up new ones, the little stinkers. So those are our two types of root. Now, flipping back to your levels of organization, you have the tissues and cell categories. And we're going to look at those with respect to our new packet. And so on the next page, we've got a plant that is cut in 3 different organs, one of which is the leaf, another is the stem, and another is the root. And when we look at the root, you can see that the 3 types of tissue are being identified in the root. Mine is color-coded, so I can see that the dermal tissue is always going to be the outermost. So we can label the dermal tissue on all 3 organs to see where it's at. This lighter greenish blue section in the center is going to be the ground tissue. And then here's ground tissue here. And having 2 different colors for that, and then a 3rd color for the vascular tissue would be helpful. Vascular tissue in the roots is in the center, but then in the stem, you can see that it's spread out within the ground tissue, and it's got ground tissue on either side. And it's organized a little bit differently. And then you see in the leaf, we've got vascular tissue organized even more differently. So I'd like you to appreciate the fact that they are arranged differently depending on which organ we happen to be in. But suffice it to say, what I would like you to annotate here on the side is that for my dermal tissue is a plant covering. It is the outermost layer of all the organs. Dermal tissue can be waxy on certain organs, not on all organs, but on some organs it can. It can have stomates. Where have we seen stomates so far? So far, we've seen stomates on the bottom of leaves. We won't really see them anywhere else. Dermal tissue will be clear to let light pass through. Which makes sense, right? Don't plants need light for photosynthesis? So it better be clear so it can get through. Ground tissue can be used for storage or as storage, storage of water, storage of sugars, storage of minerals. Ground tissue can be used as support. Obviously, ground tissue in a stem is going to keep the stem from drooping over, right? Ground tissue is going to allow for cell division. That's mitosis, making new cells, which means it's going to help the plant grow, isn't it? Sure is. And then probably the most important is that the ground tissue is what is going to be the site for photosynthesis. And then you've got your vascular tissue. And the vascular tissue is going to serve 2 functions. It is either going to transport water and minerals, or it's going to transport, I'm going to put in quotes, food, amino acids, and hormones. Now, when I say food, I really mean sugars. The sugars that are made from photosynthesis. So if you need to annotate on your page that when we say food, we mean sugars, then do that. If you're going to remember that the food means sugars, then you don't have to do that. What I would like you to appreciate is that the arrangement of these is going to be different depending on which organ you're in, and the functions are going to vary depending on which organ. So the arrangement and functions of tissues vary from organ to organ. Again, what are organs of a plant? Leaves, stems, roots, fruits. Okay? Flowers. So they're going to be different because they all do different things. In this slide, we're actually going to focus more on what the vascular tissue is doing, because it actually, in this picture, splits the vascular tissue into the two major bundles that we're going to be concerned with. So this page, we're going to say vascular tissue in more detail. Vascular tissue comes in two bundles. The first bundle is called the xylem. And xylem's job is to transport water and minerals from the roots to the rest of the plant. The other bundle is the phloem. The phloem's job is to transport the food, which, remember, is the sugars, the amino acids, and hormones throughout the plant. And what I'd like you to keep in mind is that all of this stuff, the sugars, the amino acids, and the hormones, they're all dissolved in water. It's the only way we can move them. They have to be mixed in with water in order to be moved. But what I'd like you to think about is, if I ask you what is the purpose of xylem, and we say to transport water from the roots, just think of it as just straight up water from the ground. Whereas the phloem is going to be moving stuff in an opposite direction. It's moving sugar, hormones, and amino acids throughout the plant, usually from top down. The only way to move it is while it's dissolved in water. This vascular tissue, by definition, has to be composed of specific cells, and the cells for the xylem are going to be things called tracheids and vessel elements. Those are tough words, but that's what the cells are. The cells of the phloem are going to be something called sieve tubes and companion cells. Appreciate the fact that xylem and phloem are made up of different cells so that they can do their different jobs. I don't know that I'm going to ask you to identify what the cells are for each. What's more important to me is that you know that the xylem is going to be what moves the water, and the phloem is what's going to move the food and amino acids and hormones. Okay? That's going to be what's important to me. Looking at the roots in more detail, what I'd like you to do is, in that space that you have here under this big image on the right, we're going to write what are the functions of roots on the left side. And there are two. The first of which is to anchor plant to the ground. And the second job is to absorb water and minerals. If roots are the job of anchoring plants to the ground, wouldn't it be fair to say that the existence of plants in an area is going to help prevent erosion, meaning the wearing away of the ground? Yes, because as the dirt holds on to the plant, the roots of the plant also kind of hold on to the dirt. So it's kind of a symbiosis, if you will. Absorbing the water and the minerals, I want to show you a short little video about how that's working. This video is a cross-section of the roots, and what's coming off of the root is something called a root hair. And so when I look at this video, the root hair, and you've got water and ions in the soil, you can see that the water and the ions are being drawn into the root hairs and then through the ground tissue of the roots into the vascular tissue, specifically the xylem. So again, you see all of these molecules coming through the root hairs and eventually making their way to the core of the root to get into the xylem. So what I'd like to add to our sheet now is why, when I look at this picture here, why are there so many root hairs, right? If this is a root hair, I guess that wasn't the best question or the best font color to use, but that's okay. Why so many root hairs? Would be on the right-hand side. And here's what I'd like us to write. If there's more root hairs equals more surface area. And if there's more surface area, doesn't that mean more water absorption? Oops. Absorption. Absolutely. So the more root hairs you have, that increases the surface area, which means you can suck more water in, which is way more efficient for the plant. So very important. Once the water's drawn into the root, it needs to be delivered up the plant. And on this page, there's actually more to it than I need you to worry about. But if we look at the picture in the upper right-hand corner of the whole plant, we know that in the leaf, photosynthesis happens here. And what does a leaf require to do photosynthesis? Well, number one, it needs light, right? So that's coming in from above. It needs carbon dioxide, which is going to come in through the stomates. And then water comes in through the roots. But if photosynthesis happens up in the leaf and the water comes in at the roots, how the heck do we get the water up to the leaf? That's where the xylem comes in. So if we look at this picture in the center is the one that is the most meaningful for us, because the xylem is telling you that we've got water moving in an upwards direction. Ooh, transpiration, that's a fun word. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I want you to see that the water is going to be traveling up the stem through the xylem. Now what we also see is that water is crossing over to the phloem so that it can mix with the sugars that are being made by the leaf. So when I say a source cell, what I mean is that it's a source of sugars. Those sugars have to be shared with the roots because they're working hard sucking up all that water. And the stem is working hard holding up all the leaves. So you need to share your sugars, so you're going to ship them down the phloem to ultimately end up in something called a sink cell. And a sink cell just means that that's where the sugars are going. They're going to the roots so the roots can keep growing and keep doing their thing. And so that's going to be the difference. Xylem is bringing fresh water up from the ground, and then phloem, after some water crosses over and mixes with sugars, is going to bring it back down. If you've ever seen or heard about maple syrup, and when they tap a tree to get maple syrup, what they're doing is they're poking a tree into its phloem so that it can suck out the sugary sap, which is what phloem is. It's a sugary sap. So phloem is a sugary sap. You're welcome. Now I know you'll sleep better tonight. Let's talk about that water transport in the xylem in a little bit more detail. In this picture, we can see that here's my roots with the water coming in through the root hairs to get into the xylem. That's called water uptake, or root uptake from the soil. But then it's got to travel against gravity up the stem, which we know of in a tree is the trunk, right? The stem of the tree, to get ultimately up to the leaves. Well, how does that happen? Well, here is a bit of a video that's going to help us out with that. Okay, in this video, we're going to see the water being drawn in through the root hairs. As I said, it then goes up through the xylem, gets to the leaf, and then, oh my gosh, it's leaving through holes in the leaf. What were the holes of the leaf called? Ah, the stomata. Yes. So what's happening? What's happening is that water is kind of a funny little molecule. It likes to, see these little Mickey Mouses that are in here? Water, when you draw it, is you have an oxygen attached to two hydrogens. And that little stem that I have drawn in between the two letters are bonds. They're sharing electrons. But oxygen is a little greedy. It pulls harder on those electrons than the hydrogen can. So that means the oxygen kind of feels more negative, and then the hydrogens kind of feel more positive. Well, if you think about magnets, when you have positive and negative charges close to each other, they like to attract, don't they? So what water does, because by itself, oxygen pulls on the hydrogens, if another water molecule is close, the oxygen of the second water molecule is going to be attracted to the hydrogen of the first water molecule, and it's going to form a bond called a hydrogen bond. Now, hydrogen bonds are pretty weak. They're easily broken. However, it's strong enough in this case for the waters to be linked together in a chain. And when they're linked together in a chain, we call that cohesion. So cohesion is water, I'll say waters, forming a chain with each other because of hydrogen bonds. Why is it that they don't just all fall down due to gravity? Is that there's this thing called adhesion. Adhesion is water, and I'm going to put in quotes, sticking to the sides of the xylem because of hydrogen bonds, and I'm going to abbreviate that as H bonds, with molecules in the walls of the xylem. So adhesion is going to make them temporarily stick to the sides of the xylem so they don't all fall down, and then cohesion is what keeps them together in a chain. You do need to know the difference between adhesion and cohesion. They both exist because of hydrogen bonding, but cohesion is water sticking to each other. Adhesion is a single water sticking to the side of the wall, and it just keeps it from sliding down. As we go back to the video shows these hydrogen bonds making the chain of water. So that's the cohesion. And then the hydrogen bonds that are happening on the sides of the walls of the xylem are going to be the adhesion. So that's what keeps them from falling down. But as we follow it up into the leaf, we see that water is starting to leave the stomates of the leaf. And water leaving the stomates of the leaf is called transpiration. So let's come back to here, and up here at the top with our stomate, we're going to have transpiration is going to be the loss of water that evaporates into the air through the stomates, which we saw in our celery lab. We knew that water traveled up what we now call the xylem because we saw food-colored stains that the water brought up through the xylem. The leaves turned a color of the food coloring, but the overall mass of our apparatus went down, as did the water volume, because we had water come out through the stomates. And so really what happens here is every time we lose a water out of the stomate, another water is pulled up through the roots. And so we want there to be a loss of water. Now, what's really happening though is that not only is the water pulling and coming out of the plant, we also have in the stomate, you see these darker molecules that are going in the other opposite direction, going into the plant? That would be carbon dioxide. And so as long as there's plenty of water coming out of the stomates, carbon dioxide is able to come in to the stomates. But look what happens when it gets bright and sunny and kind of warm. The stomates start to close. And then carbon dioxide is left outside, and there's no more movement of water inside. Interesting, right? So the last thing that I want you to annotate here, is that if the stomates close, then water stops moving up the xylem. If stomates close and the movement of water stops, that's one thing. But then the flip side is that carbon dioxide can't get in. And if carbon dioxide can't get in, can photosynthesis keep going? No. So what's really important that a plant needs all the time? It needs access to water. Because if it doesn't have access to enough water, then it's going to shut down photosynthesis, and then the plant's ultimately going to die. Water your plants, kids. That's important. This video is going to show the xylem. And in the xylem, you're going to have these water molecules, and you can see all the big purple ones are the oxygen molecule, and then they're stuck to the hydrogens of the next water molecule. Remember, this is called what? Cohesion. And then the fact that it sticks to the side of the xylem, that's adhesion. Well, now let's flip the leaf over, and you flip the leaf over, and we see our pretty little stomata. How fun, just like we did through our nail polish. And as you can see, an open stomate is going to have water coming out of the stomate called transpiration, because it's evaporation. And so every time a water comes out, more water can be pulled up through the xylem. And that's an important concept that I need to make sure that you're familiar with. That is going to be the end of this first part. I know that it was pretty long, but there is going to be a second part that goes with this, so stay tuned for that. And thanks for watching. I hope that was helpful.